Thank you, Peter. At the outset, I'll have to follow his example. I'm doing it just for this session because at 12, I have to sign an MOU with Mark Walport. I'll put it back again. Welcome, friends, ladies, and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to extend my heartiest congratulations to Sir Peter for his initiative and efforts to organize the inaugural Global Conference on Science Advice to Governments. It is indeed a great honor and privilege for me to be among distinguished policymakers and science practitioners from all over the world. This morning panel is about developing an approach to international science advice. Ladies and gentlemen, former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown once remarked that many of the challenges we face today are international, and whether it's tackling climate change or fighting disease, these global problems require global solutions. That is why it is important that we create a new role for science in international policymaking and diplomacy, to place science at the heart of the progressive international agenda. He has a valid point. Science holds the key to solving many of the challenges confronting us today, from biodiversity loss to global warming, from food security to disease elimination, and from poverty alleviation to nuclear non-proliferation. It is a daunting task for today's policymakers and diplomats. In order to apply diplomacy, the scientific understanding of the issues in question must be in place. Engaging and communicating political leaders has always been a challenge for scientists. When Albert Einstein was asked why it was that we could discover how to split the atom, but had difficulty in overseeing atomic technology, I think many of you know this, he famously replied, "That is simple, my friend, because politics is more difficult than physics." Scientists aim, in essence, to remove context from their work. Their results should be as independent of social nuance and as broadly generalizable as possible. Politicians, by contrast, must treat context as king. Without context, policy making doesn't actually make much sense. Politicians must be responsive to the world around them. So the creation of policy is by definition a response to a problem or issue in the world as it is. If all scientists sought to be as responsive as politicians, we would likely have little more than a string of short-term research endeavors, unlikely to address any of the universe's big questions. If our politicians sought policy solutions devoid of contextual mooring or too generalizable across all situations, we would likely see foolish remaking of the world to fit ideological lenses. It is clear that in an ideal world, we would not have our scientists and politicians completely divorced from each other, working to address only the grand questions of the universe or the minutiae of the moment. To do their jobs well, scientists and politicians must operate in very different settings, but it is also important they act together to understand, manage, and improve our lives. Ladies and gentlemen, there are times when a government knows it needs science and technology. It needs science and technology advice especially in time of crisis and emergencies. The harrowing mystery of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, which disappeared on March 8 with 239 people aboard, and the recent tragedy of MH17 was a clear example. In the case of MH370, it is also a scientific challenge that will probably change the aviation landscape in future. How do we use science and technology to locate the plane that is still missing today? I have had first-hand experience in this because my Prime Minister took a personal interest in it. Trained as a biologist, I must confess to you today in this closed-door room, at times I felt lost. I'm a biologist. I don't know about pings and the handshake and all those terms in the aerospace. But it shows also, as Mark mentioned on the first day, that science advises in some ways. We can be specialists, but really we are jack of all trades. So we need the support of our specialist friends. Anyway, whatever the past frustration and possibly even disappointment yet to come, the bigger and much more significant story of the search for MH370 is what has gone right. Simply put, it has been a magnificent demonstration of how response to human tragedy can unite rather than divide, reinforcing the impulse to cooperate rather than to confront. The search has involved unprecedented international cooperation, not least also in the realm of science and technology. First in the South China Sea, and then in the Southern Ocean, from 26 countries. What is extraordinary also is that many of these countries, like China, Japan, the Philippines, Malaysia, South Korea, and Vietnam, have been at one another's throats over territorial and other disputes, while others, not least China and the US, are abidingly suspicious of each other's geopolitical motives and intentions. While there's some closure to the tragedy of MH17, with the recent repatriation of the remains of some of the passengers to their respective countries of origin, the sad saga of MH370 is still ongoing. Yesterday in Canberra, the governments of Australia and Malaysia signed an agreement to share costs on the continuing search for the missing plane. And here again, the element of S&T is in full display. That is the usage of undersea search equipment, world-class experts, and cutting-edge technology. Malaysia is, of course, indebted to the leading role of the Australian government in the complex and challenging exercise, but no less significant is the Chinese government's ongoing support and resources dedicated to the search efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, let me move on to a related subject, and that is to begin by saying charity begins at home. In deliberating an approach to international science advice, just like New Zealand, which places a premium on its standing as the #1 producer of dairy products, our experience in Malaysia shows that we need to get our house in order first. When Prime Minister Najib assumed office in 2009, one of his priorities is to reinvigorate the economy. In the 50 years since independence, Malaysia's GDP has increased more than 100-fold. Over the past 4 decades, we have averaged nearly 7% annual growth. Per capita GDP has risen from US $370 to around US $9,000 in 2009. Still, that is not enough. We have fallen into what is known as the middle income trap. The economy has stagnated. The low-skilled income generating jobs in the manufacturing industry, which has been dominated by multinationals for so long, are at risk of leaving for cheaper cost location in neighboring ASEAN countries and China. Malaysia needs to reinvent itself. To sustain the target of being a developed country by 2020, as envisioned by former Prime Minister Mahathir in his Vision 2020, Najib launched his Economic Transformation Plan, ETP, with a target of per capita GDP of around $15,000 in 2020, and with the private sector playing a pivotal role. In 2012, the figure stood at a respectable $10,500. The ETP is underpinned by a new economic model with three enduring pillars, namely high income, inclusivity, and sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, the question is, where is the place of science and technology in all of this? I believe science and technology is a powerful instrument of social change. Its effect on modernization is not merely through improved technology, but also through changing the lives of individuals and of societies and nations. Malaysia has a strong commitment to the development of science and technology. We are aware that we cannot provide for the welfare of our people unless we can develop and sustain a strong technological and scientific base. We need to rejuvenate science so that it is ready and able to generate the big new ideas and game-changing strategies that will create wealth and jobs for our people. That is the running instruction of the Prime Minister to me, really. So late last year, upon my advice, the Prime Minister launched the Science to Action, or S2A, initiative. He endorses the notion that the successful implementation of our many STI programs will depend heavily on a close understanding and collaboration between industry and government. The S2A is the initiative to intensify the application of science and technology for industry development, people's well-being, and an improved governance of STI that aligns to the new economic model. But, ladies and gentlemen, the core issue for many developing countries is and will always be the preoccupation of political leaders is improving the livelihood of its citizens through poverty alleviation. Malaysia is lucky. Poverty rates have fallen from 49% at independence in 1957 to less than 4% today. One of the economic drivers for that is providing land for the landless and job for the jobless through a massive land development scheme known as FELDA, which involves more than 100,000 households and nearly 500,000 people. Now, while the economic payoff is obvious, it also has a downside: development at a cost to the environment. Conservation versus deforestation. Conservation versus the destruction of forest inhabitants, such as the iconic orangutans of Borneo. So where is the balance? So this is one of a number of sustainable development challenges facing the global community, in particular the developing world today. An acronym coined by former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and is easily remembered is WEHAP. That is for water, energy, healthcare, agriculture, food security, and biodiversity loss amidst the emerging threat of global warming. These are the global challenges that back the wisdom of science advice in trying to develop an approach or approaches to mitigate the adverse consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, to be sure, the scientific community and the NGOs have been in the fray for quite some time, as you all of us know. In fact, for quite a long, long time. Yesterday, in his opening remarks, Stephen Wilson listed out some of the programs undertaken by ICSU in its Science for Policy Strategic Trust, ranging from its engagement during the Earth Summit in 1992, the WSSD in 2002, the Rio Plus 20 in 2012, and the ongoing discussion on the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. The question of sustainable development has been at the heart of the debate since the term was introduced by Madam Brundtland in the seminal report, Our Common Future, released in 1987. In terms of international science advice in this area, the latest platform is the SDSN, Sustainable Development Solution Network Leadership Council, chaired by the economist Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University. I've been directly involved in international science advice in the realm of biodiversity and ecosystem services for some time now. The landmark Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which I co-chaired 8 years ago, undertaken by nearly 2,000 scientists from 95 countries, demonstrated that such an intergovernmental platform can create a clear, valuable, policy-relevant consensus from a wide range of information sources about the state, trends, and outlooks of human-environment interaction, with focus on the impacts of ecosystem change on human well-being. It showed that such a platform can support decision-makers in the translation of knowledge into policy. Responding to this need, the UN General Assembly welcomed the creation of an intergovernmental science policy platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services, or IPBES, in 2012, of which I am the founding chair. The structure of IPBES mirrors the Nobel Prize-winning IPCC, but our aims go further, and this is a subject I think Peter will take up on Saturday, and that includes the need for capacity building to help bridge different knowledge systems. Capacity building would also ensure the wider participation of young scientists from the developing world in the ongoing conversation on the science policy interface. Ladies and gentlemen, clearly, research collaboration and multidisciplinary approach in science looks set to increase in terms of importance, scale, and impact. It requires international cooperation on a large scale because of the nature and magnitude of the potential consequences of these problems. No one country or scientific discipline will be able to offer complete solutions. It is also quite obvious that the timing to make a concerted intervention on the need for an approach or approaches to international science advice is now. Even at the global level, no less than the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon himself has seen it fit to establish a panel of experts, and a number of them are here with us today, to advise him on matters pertaining to science, the so-called Scientific Advisory Board that he launched in Berlin earlier this year. Ladies and gentlemen, so far many of the approaches comprise a board or panel. The one-person science advisory approach at the international level has been restricted to that of UNEP and that of the EU that we heard from Anne Glover yesterday, somewhat quite unhappily, of course. There is also the informal channel of utilizing the Academy of Sciences, such as the Royal Society, the US National Academy of Sciences, the World Academy of Sciences, and the Inter-Academy Panel, the IAP. So the challenge for science advice to government is how best to orchestrate the ongoing scientific activities that have blossomed to address such issues collectively, while combining scientific with wider social, political, and economic perspective. And last but not least, one key message that I also would like to emphasize in developing an approach to international science advice is that it takes time and it will not happen overnight. And one other important message is that our message has to be nurtured, massaged, and packaged well. So communication and public awareness is key to securing the buy-in of our political masters. The bottom line is that we need to get the job done. So now, let's go and get it. Thank you.